In this video, we are going to go over how to do double unit conversions, squared or cubed unit conversions as well. So you can use dimensional analysis, which we have done so far, to convert more than one unit, and it might feel different at first, but you'll get used to it, and it's not so bad. We can also do that to convert squared or cubed units, okay? So there is some math involved if these units are squared or cubed. Lengths that are squared are considered areas, and then lengths that are cubed are considered volume. So when we convert double unit conversions, we simply need to convert each unit. In this case, units that cancel, they could be in many boxes apart from each other, and we're going to see some examples with that. Instead of being in boxes diagonally from each other, they'll still be diagonal, but they might not be adjacent to each other. So if we look at this first example, we have 5 meters per second, and you want to think about it as converting meters to kilometers and then seconds to hours. And there's lots of ways to do this, but I'm going to show you what I'm going to do. The denominator here of seconds has a 1 next to it. Okay, the 1 is not impacting the math here, but you can put a 1 there if you want a number. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to first convert meters to kilometers. So I have meters, diagonally I'll put meters, and then I'll go to kilometers. I know that meters, or that kilometers has a prefix, so it'll have a 1, and then the corresponding value is 10 to the third. I have converted those two units. Now, what I'm going to do next is I'm going to ignore these boxes. So I'm going to maybe I'll highlight them that way because I do care about them, but I'm just kind of ignoring them right now because I already did those conversions. So now here's what's really weird, and probably the first time that you've seen this. We are going to convert seconds to hours, and since seconds begins in the denominator, I want my unit that cancels it, another seconds, to also be diagonal from it. So it needs to go into the numerator. We'll go from seconds to minutes. There are 60 seconds in 1 minute. Seconds cancels. Now I'm at minutes if I stop. I want hours though, so I'll go from minutes to hours, and I solve this out. The math here, of course, is going to be 5 times 60 times 60 divided by 10 to the third. I'll plug that into my calculator. And when I get this, I get 18. Now, let's talk about units. Make sure we're good on units. We know that meters cancels. Kilometers does not cancel. I do not see kilometers in the denominator anywhere, so it does not cancel. Seconds and seconds, even though they're not right next to each other, they are still diagonal. 1 is in the numerator, 1 is in the denominator, and so they will cancel. The same thing is true for minutes. So we are going to be left with kilometers per hour, and you could put a 1 in your denominator if you wanted to. Okay, or you could just write it 18 kilometers per hour. Okay, so that is how we convert double units. Now, when you convert squared or cubed units, you need to square or cube your conversion factors. But note, we're not going to square or cube the number that we already started with. So here we're asked, convert 45 meters to picometers. And it may seem like it's not here, so I'm going to erase this. You don't need to erase it on your paper, and then I'll show you. What I want you to do is ignore the square or the cube right away. We will come back and deal with that. So we're going to go from meters to picometers. We know that pico has a prefix, so we'll put a 1 there, and then the corresponding value is 10 to the minus 12. So we've converted meters to picometers. We have not converted square meters to picometers squared. These guys are already squared. It's 45 meters squared. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to simply square each of these. So when you plug this into your calculator, you're going to have 45 in parentheses times 1 squared, so I guess I'll put that. And then divided by, and you might have to do double parentheses, 10 to the minus 12 squared. Now, what you can do is because the 2 and the minus 12 are in the same level, they're in that exponent level, they will just multiply. So if you wanted to, you should get the same answer if you did 45 times 1 squared divided by 10 to the minus 24. So plug in both of those. Just make sure you're good with your calculator to see if you get the right answer. And I get 4.5 times 10 to the 25th picometers squared. When I do it with the bottom one, let me just check. I want to make sure I'm good here. And I do. I get 4.5 times 10 to the 25th picometers squared. Okay, meters squared cancels, and I'm left with picometers squared. Couple things as we work through some example problems. This will be bonus on the test. As far as if it shows up, it would only be in the extra credit section. So if this is hard, that's because it is bonus level. Make sure you report your final answer to the correct number of sig figs. Remember, if we started out with 2 sig figs, our final answer needs 2 sig figs. Up here, we started out with 1 sig fig, 5. So what I really should have done here is made this 20 kilometers per hour. So I'm just going back and making sure with sig figs. And I know that those are obnoxious, but for this unit, we need to worry about sig figs. Okay, so let's do some example problems. In example 1, we are given 756.0 meters squared, and we're going to centimeters squared. So we're going to do 756.0 meters squared, and we're going to go to centimeters squared. Remember what I said, let's ignore those squares right now. So let's just go from meters to centimeters. Centimeters has a prefix, so I'll put a 1 there. And then, oops, accidentally scrolled up. 10 to the minus 2 corresponds to the prefix centi. Okay, now we're going to square it. Remember, the number they gave you is already squared. So now what we're going to do is we are going to square each of these. By squaring the number and the unit, we make sure that we're doing this right. So for my calculator, I'm going to plug in 756.0 divided by 10 to the minus 2 squared, which is the same thing as 10 to the minus 4. Plug that into your calculator. Let's see what we get. And I'm going to answer my mine in scientific notation. I get 7.56 times 10 to the 6, and that would be centimeters squared. But to conserve significant figures, we have 4 sig figs here. So to make this number 4 sig figs, right now we have 3. We are going to just add a 0 there. And that is the answer for that one. Okay, let's see how it's different in number 2. We are given 6520 kilometers cubed. So we have a volume here. And we're going to go from kilometers cubed to micrometers cubed. This is a hard question. Again, I'm going to ignore the cubes for right now. So let's go from kilometers to micrometers. In order to do that, I'm going to go through the base unit. 1 kilometer is 10 to the 3rd meters. And then I'm going to go from meters to micrometers. 1 micrometer is 10 to the minus 6 meters. Now, we've got to worry about this cubed. So what we're going to do is we're just going to cube everything that we did not start with. So we'll cube that, we'll cube that, we will cube that, and we will cube that. Hopefully it makes sense to you. 1 cubed is still going to be 1. And so what I've highlighted in yellow, I'm not going to bother plugging into my calculator because maybe in other conversions we plug in 1s, but here we've got a lot going on, and so I'm going to choose to not plug those into my calculator. If you're using a TI-30X2S, then here's what I'm going to plug in. Plug in 6520 times 10 to the 3rd cubed, which hopefully you can say that that is 10 to the 9th, 3 times 3. if you want to instead plug in 10 to the 9th, divided by 10 to the minus 6 cubed, which again, just multiply it, 10 to the negative 6 cubed is going to be 10 to the minus 18. So what you might have, and is totally acceptable to plug into your calculator, because sometimes double parentheses can get a little tricky. Oops, I don't know why I did 10 to the 3rd. I just do it in my head oftentimes, 10 to the 9th and then 10 to the minus 18. So that is what I'm plugging into my calculator, 6520, parentheses, 10 to the 9th, parentheses, divided by 10 to the negative 18, parentheses. And when you have doubled and cubed and squared units, you tend to get really big or really small numbers. So I get 6.52 times 10 to the 30th. That's a huge number. We solve for it in micrometers cubed. For sig figs, we started with 3 sig figs. We still have 3 sig figs, so I'm good. Okay, so let's look at number 3. I'm going to delete some of this so it's not in our way. This one's different. This one's a double unit conversion. So we're given 62.0 miles. And then hours is in the denominator, so that's for every 1 hour. Now when we count sig figs, this 1 hour is not going to be part of our sig figs, okay? It's 62.0. How I do these problems is I kind of lay out a game plan. I'm going to go from miles to kilometers, and then I'm going to go from hours to seconds. So let's just do miles to kilometers first. We'll go from miles to kilometers. That is not a metric conversion. You may know that. Oftentimes runners know exactly how to go from kilometers to miles. But on a test or quiz, I would give you this conversion because it's not metric. So there's 1.61 kilometers for every 1 mile. And you may know that kilometers are shorter than miles, so this makes sense. Now, miles has gone to kilometers. I was able to do that in 1 step. Now, let's go from hours to seconds. This is going to be a little bit different because we're going to have hours be diagonal from each other, although they're not just right next to each other, and the boxes adjacent to each other. So that's okay, not a big deal. I'm going to go from hours to seconds. I actually know that conversion. 1 hour is 3,600 seconds. So my math here is going to be 62.0 times 1.61 divided by 3,600. This is exactly what I'm plugging into my calculator. And let's make sense of this. If I'm driving a car and I'm going 62 miles an hour and I try to convert it to kilometers per second, the same speed, I'm going to get a very small number because cars don't travel very many kilometers in each second. And this makes sense. I get 2.772777, a lot of sevens, probably 7 repeating, times 10 to the minus 2, but I cut it off at 3 sig figs because I started with 3 sig figs, so I need to end with 3 sig figs. Remember, the times 10 to the minus 2, that does not impact your significant figures count. And then lastly, we want to put units on this. So hours canceled. We're left with kilometers and seconds. So this will be kilometers per second, which is exactly what we wanted. Okay, let's do a couple more. I did 5 hours per day. You may get a screen time notification every week that says you are on your phone for 5 hours a day. So if you wanted to, we could convert that to how many years every decade you're on your phone if you keep up that current trend. So we are going to convert hours to years, just my numerator to my numerator, and then days to decades. So we have one significant figure, so our final answer will only have one significant figure. We have 5 hours for every 1 day. So hours to years. I don't know how many hours are in a year, so I'm going to build it up. I know hours to days, maybe. And in one day, there's 24 hours. And then I'm going to go from days to years. I do know that. And I'm going to take into account leap years, which I know might be obnoxious, but just to get an accurate number, there's 365.25 days in every year. And now I've converted hours to years. I'm going to ignore these boxes that I've already messed with, and I'm going to convert days now. So days is going to go diagonal. I'm going to convert days to decades. So let's go from days to years. There are 365.25 days in every 1 year, which I know is very weird that we're having repeating numbers, but just don't think too much about it. The less you think about that in this specific instance, you will be less likely to confuse yourself. And then we'll go from years to decades. You may know that there are 10 years in every 1 decade. And so days cancels, years cancels. The only units that never canceled were years and decades, which is what we want. So my math here, make sure you plug this in and get it right. We're going to do 5 times 365.25 times 10. I just multiply all of my numerators that aren't 1, divided by 24, and then also divided by 365.25. I'm going to plug that in. It'll be interesting for me to see how many years you might be on your phone if you are on your phone 5 hours a day. Wow, that's kind of crazy. We get 2.08 years every decade. So that will be rounding to 1 sig fig. This would be 2 years per every decade. So every 10 years, if you're on your phone 2 hours a day, you'd really spend 20% of your time on your phone, which seems like a lot. Okay, now this last one is definitely the hardest one of these set of notes. And here we've got 32 milligrams for every 1 centimeter squared. And we're going to convert from milligrams to kilograms. That should not be bad. And then we're going to convert centimeters squared to meters squared. Okay, so when we do sig figs here, just as a reminder, I know I've already said it, we're going to do based off the 32, not the 1. So we want 2 in our final answer. So let's go from milligrams to kilograms. I'm going to go first through the base unit because I don't know how many milligrams are in a kilogram. Milligrams has a prefix, so we'll put a 1 there. 10 to the minus third is the corresponding value. Then we'll go from grams to kilograms. Kilograms has a prefix, so we'll put a 1 there. 10 to the third is the corresponding value. Now, your brain may just for a second tell you 10 to the minus third and 10 to the third cancel. And that is not going to be true here because they're not. One's in the numerator and 1 is in the denominator. So I have done milligrams to kilograms. And then now, maybe I use a different color. Maybe that would be easier to see. We're going to go from centimeters cubed to meters centimeters squared. We have a square here to meters squared. So we're going to go first from centimeters to meters. We're not going to worry about the square part. 1 centimeter is 10 to the minus 2 meters. Now we will worry about just squaring the ones that needed to be squared. So we get something that looks like this. So what you plug into your calculator is 32 times 10 to the minus third times, that's a 1, so 1 squared is still going to be 1, divided by 10 to the third, and then divided by 10 to the minus second squared. And you probably need double parentheses on that to keep everything in the correct spot. Or this might also look like 32, 10 to the minus third, divided by 10 to the third, divided by, and distribute that 10 to the minus 4. So go ahead and plug in either. They should give you the same answer. Make sure you are getting the same thing I'm getting with your calculator. And here we're going to get 3.2 times 10 to the minus 1. Our units, milligrams to kilograms, we already canceled those. And then centimeters squared, we're left with kilograms divided by meters squared. Okay, our significant figures are still the same there, so we are good. Okay, you could have also written this, your calculator may have given you 0.32 kilograms per meters squared.